Good morning. My presentation will cover two case studies at different scales of residential development, starting at the lot scale. And I find this is a really useful level to convey key principles and processes to address urban sustainability, including dealing with the pressing issue of urban heat, but more broadly than that, how we can create livable spaces that also address energy efficiency, urban water management, urban biodiversity in a truly integrated way. But of course, we need to scale up beyond that and tackle things at the precinct and neighbourhood approach. And my second case study will do that. And these are two projects that are very close to my heart. They're projects that I've been involved with intimately as both a designer and a researcher. The first one is my family home, so a particularly intimate scale. And this is a two-lot residential subdivision in the Fremantle suburb of Hilton. And when we set out to do this project nearly 6 years ago, we wanted to challenge this idea that a high-performance home that is naturally cool in summer and warm in winter is expensive. They need to be high-tech and outside the realm of the volume construction industry. And from both my working and research experience, this is not the case. So we set ourselves a very personal challenge of building two 10-star NetHES rated homes on this site, using a volume builder that had never done this before, using typical construction materials that are used by the volume industry, typical trade work and trade detail construction. And in doing this, demonstrate that really it's accessible to industry now. North is towards the top of the screen. So you can see these homes are orientated on an ideal east-west orientation, glazing to the north, living areas to the north, narrow in their depth to allow good cross-ventilation for our prevailing breezes where we are. But also what this plan shows, this illustration, I'll take you through what it looks like now shortly, is we have the summer version illustrated on the front house and the winter version to the back. And the back is our home. And here what you see is that in summer it's all about shading. So we have shade sails up over the northern living spaces. We have deciduous shade trees used for that summer shade and winter light. And the house is very protected, both around the home, the fabric of the home, and of course the indoor living spaces too. And then the rear home, you can see that's in winter, light pouring in through those northern windows, carefully designed to capture that warming light. And as we think about designing our buildings to be more comfortable during hot periods, we can't lose track of the fact that we also need to be designing our buildings to be naturally warmer in winter, because otherwise we'll end up with a situation where we get significant energy spikes over those winter months. And these two things, of course, needn't be mutually exclusive. Through well-established climate-responsive design, our homes can be both warm in winter and cooler in summer. So this is a photo of the home on the block in autumn. So you can see there, this is the rear home. You can see here with the shade sails down and the outdoor living area open, the trees beginning to lose their leaves from one of the courtyards, but light-coloured roofs, okay, that reflect heat rather than absorbing it. Plenty of green space, particularly cooling green space around the outdoor living areas. Eaves that shade the building, not only for reducing heat load on that building and keeping it more comfortable inside, but also keeping heat off that thermal mass and reducing that localised outside heating. And I find this photo interesting because when you compare it to the property on the right, which is a home built by our state government housing agency for social housing, that is not an uncommon design response. And you couldn't build a less climate sensible building. It's orientated 90 degrees the wrong way, so it actually gets full morning and afternoon sun exposure in summer. Little to no winter northern sole again, and of course complemented by a dark-coloured, high thermal mass, black tiled roof, which both gets very hot and holds on to that heat as well, and chances are it's poorly insulated under that roof as well. And this is the type of housing that is often built, leading to homes that contribute to localised heating in terms of external heat build-up, the urban heat island effect, and also providing homes that have no resilience in terms of internal comfort for the occupants, which then leads to either discomfort and potential health impacts from heat and cold in winter, but also much higher energy use. It's also noticeably lacking any trees and dark-coloured paving unshaded as well. So it's a great comparison of what to do and what not to do. And we really need to start seeing the landscaping as a way of helping to tackle the urban heat issue. And what I hope to convey through these two case studies, both at home and as I scale up, is that we shouldn't be looking at just dealing with urban heat on its own. When we look at urban heat, it's a combination of both providing resilience to occupants by having outdoor spaces and, importantly, the homes inside are comfortable and designed so that these homes can take periods of high heat. But we really need to be designing developments as a whole and taking this precinct scale approach. So we are integrating built form, landscape, and utility services being water, wastewater, stormwater management, and of course electricity, if we're going to be creating places that are truly efficient and truly livable and addressing a number of sustainability challenges. So here, this is the eastern facing part of the front house. It's the part of the site that gets the hot morning sun, which is brutal in Perth. Now, of course, we're very mindful of water use here on the site, so we've got a carefully hydro-zoned landscape where we put the water where it really needs to work. But we also need to be providing shade and transpiration opportunities across the whole site. So out the front, it's native landscaping. On the verge, the front yard, this landscaping is only 5 years old. It was a completely bare site when we started. And we've chosen deep-rooted vegetation that can survive happily without the need for supplementary summer irrigation, deep-rooted to bring that moisture up into the canopy and to transpire, also providing biodiversity benefits. The driveway down to the rear home, it's gravel, so it allows for good stormwater infiltration. This not only deals with the issue of stormwater, but it also makes sure that there is moisture in the soil. That in itself provides a cooling effect through evaporation, but also enables the establishment of vegetation. And as we start getting into the internal realm of the home, we're looking for shade, greater transpiring, greater cooling species. So, and you can see here also breaking up that pave or that gravel area with the use of plantings for cooling as well. Light-coloured materials. And then into the backyard where we are getting into those true intimate spaces in and around the home. This is a photo of that same back decking area in summer. Shade sails go up for that summer shade. Grapevines that provide additional shade in summer and then lose their leaves for winter. Again, gravel paving throughout, shaded with deciduous trees, so you're providing shading over that material so it doesn't take the heat, more comfortable to walk through. And then lawn that is properly irrigated with good irrigation scheduling so it can transpire as it wants to do to remain healthy and naturally cool, but not overwatering. This has been the subject of detailed performance monitoring, this home and landscape, for 5 years now, since we first built it. When we designed the home, we designed it to be an ongoing living lab. So we have some 70 channels of data acquisition across the property, both in the building and the landscape. And here's an illustration of how the home performs thermally, with the blue line there being the indoor living room area, and the orange line being outdoors. And you can see this is, again, just for the purpose of being succinct, midday temperature readings across the year. And you can see the home comfortably sitting in that sort of 20 to 24 degree band. And this is with no air conditioning. no mechanical heating or cooling. It's a 10-star home. And meanwhile, we're recording temperatures in the high 30s and low 40s, and we're seeing this lovely, comfortable internal temperature. But as I mentioned, we have to be looking beyond just thermal performance. That's critically important, but not at the cost of energy. This is the home's energy profile on an average daily basis. So we're using around 15 units or 15 kilowatt hours of energy each day, which is roughly 40% lower than the local average. But importantly, our energy profile also includes the energy used to produce our own water. We produce around 90% of our own water through rainwater harvesting, grey water reuse, and a shared bore. It also includes the energy to charge an electric car. So we're bringing mobility into the home energy budget as well. But alongside that, you can see where the source of that energy comes from, which is from solar with a battery backup for nighttime use. And so we have about a 90% self-reliance in energy, but we're actually exporting nearly 2.5 times of what we use. So the house is a mini power plant. And the small amount of grid energy that we do use there, that grey portion, is actually when we're charging the car at night time. We try and charge the car during the day, so we're using free solar energy. It's the time to do it. But that's not always possible when you're driving around and need to charge at night. Of course, the battery at home is designed to cover the house needs and not necessarily recharge the car. That would be very inefficient infrastructure sizing. The whole home is designed as a system. And likewise with water, we've had a 90% reduction in mains water use. Firstly, through the water efficiency measures that are taken within the home and landscape, but then looking to alternate sources, rainwater harvesting, grey water reuse, and stormwater reuse through a local bore, which is based on a local stormwater infiltration and reuse model, in comparison to the local average scheme water use and the local Perth average home with a bore. So you can see the type of landscaping that can be sustained, the benefits it brings in terms of comfort, biodiversity, and food production, and it can be done while still meeting very important water efficiency measures. But of course, we need to scale this up, and my next case study is looking at a precinct approach, and this is WGV in the suburb of Whitegum Valley, also in Fremantle, just around the corner from my home. And it's a project that's been delivered by our state development agency, Development WA, formerly known as Landcorp, but they've rebadged. This is a 2-hectare, medium-density residential development. And the important thing here is that we are seeing these same types of concepts that I covered in my small home case study at a precinct scale, and we're also seeing multiple building typologies in the development, and that's what makes this project so exciting. My firm were the landscape architects and sustainability consultants for this project, and I was also the principal researcher on a 4-year living lab project funded by the CRC for Low Carbon Living, which many of you would know about. So here, an illustration of the what we call the detached residential homes. So this particular precinct, which will eventually have around 80 dwellings spanning detached homes, group housing, and apartment buildings at different scales, was really about providing diversity of housing to the market, getting density up, which is obviously something we have to be doing in our cities in key strategic areas to reduce urban sprawl and improve the viability of public transport, of commerce, and of course, being able to service these cities with infrastructure more efficiently. But how do we do that in a way that we still have this livability outcome and, of course, part of that, addressing urban heat? So in this particular development, we looked at having homes, and again, following on from the key themes at my place, we just finished my home project as we started the design on this. And we had the opportunity to look at taking the learnings into not only the planning of this project, but then also in things like the design guidelines and other mechanisms that were put in place to ensure that this project would roll out as intended. And it was put forward as one of Development WA's innovation through demonstration projects and an opportunity to test different ideas at the planning, design and construction level. So all of the homes designed and the lot layouts are again on that east-west orientation, so you naturally have good climate responsive opportunities for those homes. We go from the detached lots, of which there are 20 odd, into attached dwellings, which is just a fancy name for the old duplex, where there are sites that enable 2 dwellings on that one block. In this particular case, there are 2 separate homes, but with a shared laundry, a shared carport, a shared rooftop carport, and also beginning to see shared infrastructure, so a shared rainwater tank and a shared PV system. And then going to the Gen Y demonstration house, which is actually 3 one-bedroom, 1-bathroom units interlocked, presenting at a scale that represents a fairly typical building scale for a new single detached home in this suburb and many other Perth suburbs. So it's kind of density by stealth, these 3 apartments on the one site. And you can see here again light coloured materials, in this case low thermal mass materials too for the exterior. Smaller building on lot and greater landscaping areas around the outside to ensure again the benefits of vegetation, shading and cooling. This building also has shared infrastructure, shared rainwater tank, shared PV and also shared battery. And as we scale up, this is a 12-unit building called Shack, which is sustainable housing for artists and creatives. It's a social housing cooperative model that was led by the eventual tenants in this project and delivered by Access Housing. So here, again, the buildings designed in 2 parts to ensure that every unit not only had good solar orientation, but really good cross-ventilation for natural cooling in summer. I should point out that all the dwellings on this project had a benchmark target of 7-star NAHES, so moving beyond the 6-star compliance requirement under the National Construction Code to ensure that from a building performance level, people had homes that were naturally more comfortable and better suited to a hotter climate. The beauty, again, you can see here of seeing these compact buildings is the outdoor spaces around them really being used for high-quality landscaping. And this is the largest of the multi-residential buildings on site. This is Evermore, and this is 24 apartments. Again, the overall building in 2 parcels to ensure both northern aspects and complete cross-ventilation possible for all of the apartments. Both Shack and Evermore also have shared solar and battery storage. In the case of Shack, it has 40 kilowatt hours of PV and 20 kilowatt hours of battery storage. And at Evermore, 60 kilowatt PV system and around 150 kilowatt hours of energy storage. But more than that, the buildings are efficient and of course the outdoor spaces are designed for shading and cooling. Moving past the buildings and the envelope, we need to see how all of these sit within the landscape. And excuse me, but this is where I get really excited, because it is the opportunities presented at this landscape scale where precincts and neighbourhoods really start to work. From an urban heat mitigation perspective, but also from a biodiversity and from a livability perspective. When we look at a precinct approach, we can start thinking beyond a property boundary. And we can start to think how one building relates to another, how it relates to the streetscape, how the outdoor spaces, including the garden spaces, all start to connect, and where both private and public realm should properly integrate. And this can be done at the structure planning level and of course right down to the planning approval level at each lot to ensure that it fits into a greater vision. So there were existing trees on this site which were all assessed and the best trees retained for their shading benefits. But we also wanted to look at setting a vision for a site that was properly treed into the future, and we set a canopy target of 30% coverage across the precinct. One of the challenges with urban infill is you're always going to see tree loss, but it also then provides an opportunity to put in new trees, and particularly canopy trees, within the context of a future urban forest, and to choose species that really fit their spaces. And in the public realm, as the landscape architects, we have control over this, but then we also need to be clever about how we influence the choice and location of tree species within the private realm on lot as well. So by creating this urban greening plan that was used for the purpose of communicating with the local community, So they understood a process was in place to deal with replacing trees that were being taken out as part of the urban development, recognising that the key species, particularly habitat trees, extensive effort was put in place to retain those trees and work around them, including realigning roads, extending verges and the like, but also communicating the role of the different new species going in. Deciduous trees on the northern side of buildings for that summer shade and winter light. Evergreen species on east and western sides where that winter solar gain was not so critical. Ensuring that there were good linkages between remnant vegetation on adjacent sites for biodiversity benefits, and also incorporating fruit trees into some of the sheltered landscapes for their benefits also. We then look at the stormwater overlay and how do we ensure that the site is properly hydrated and moving away from this idea of draining it as quickly as possible. Now in Perth, we're infamous for our sandy soils. And this makes it easy to dig a hole, and certainly the sites are very free draining. And historically, it's been easy just to direct water to large infiltration pits and to get rid of it, where it drains into the superficial aquifer. The problem with that is that all the water moves away and you're left with dry areas. And also it takes any pollutants, particularly nutrients, with it, where it becomes point source pollution going into the aquifer to make problems downstream in terms of wetlands or the river. So how do we distribute this water? So firstly, there is a requirement for all lots to retain all of their stormwater on site. Okay, and that's through just good design and the right sizing of soak wells. So all the lots deal with their own water. But we then look at all of the water from the new roads going into shallow subterranean infiltration galleries located in areas where new trees were going in or alongside existing trees outside of their root zone, obviously, to ensure that these roads act like catchments, hydrating those areas where we want trees to take up that moisture and transpire it, with the eventual objective of being able to take deep-rooted trees off irrigation, where it's all too common in the urban development industry, wherever you go around Australia, is advanced trees go in and they are reliant on irrigation or tanker watering pretty much for the rest of their life. And we have to be moving away from that. You'll also see that large blue blob down below. So there's the dark blue areas is all the new stormwater drainage from the new development. The large light blue rectangle down below is a legacy stormwater asset that I'll talk to in a moment. And with the public realm landscaping, how do we create high quality spaces? How do we get creative with things like verges, which I believe are called nature strips over here, which is kind of an ironic term because rarely is there any nature present. They're called verges over in the West. It's one of those great little different use of terms that we have. So how do we turn verges or nature strips into usable spaces? Clearly, it's still part of the road reserve, which has now been taken over by local council, so lots of consultation in that process. But here, the purpose of expanding the width of this particular verge was to ensure adequate root protection for this beautiful Eucalyptus camandulensis, a lovely feature tree. And in doing so, there's an opportunity to create a small informal meeting space. And we can start to see, particularly in these medium density areas, how do you put these spaces to work in terms of social connection? Also extensive understory plantings for future biodiversity. A use of materials out of interest too, locally sourced from site, the local limestone, salvage timber for the fence screenings there, and also being mindful of light coloured materials. Small pocket parks, which are really making a comeback, once kind of shunned by councils because of their perceived greater maintenance requirements. But as we go into medium and high density spaces, we need to move away from this idea of just large super parks. Yes, they're important, particularly for active play and recreation purposes. But we also now need to replace the amenity that we're losing from smaller blocks with high quality public realm spaces that become our future backyards. Small spaces like this with barbecues and shelters that are used very, very well. And they're great if designed well with good SEPTED principles for really activating these infill spaces. This is the redevelopment of that legacy stormwater asset that I mentioned. It was what we referred to as a sump over in WA. Sumps are very common in Perth, particularly a lot of the development that was done post-World War II. And it's a classic old school stormwater engineering solution. At a low point in a suburb, you dig a dirty big great hole and you run your stormwater into it and it drains away. It's fenced off. And these are scattered throughout suburbia in Perth. The photo on the top left is what it was originally, and essentially it's a 2,000 cubic metre hole receiving stormwater drainage from 6 hectares of surrounding suburban roads. Now, it was already at capacity, so that turned out to be a blessing because it meant that none of the stormwater from the new development could go into it. Not that we'd want to put it there anyway, but it's the perfect drive to go, hang on, we need to be more creative and do something with the stormwater on the site. So what would potentially be seen as a constraint by some in the development industry, because what would have been a lower cost solution is not possible, actually then presents an opportunity to be more creative and have a number of benefits that spin off from that. But the original approach would have been to fence this off, maybe tidy it up for sale of the other lots, and it would have been probably left as is in return to what it was before. It was a City of Fremantle local stormwater asset, so there was no responsibility by the developer to do anything on it. But thankfully, as part of the greater vision set for the project of demonstrating leading water-sensitive urban design, but also a requirement to try and hit that 30% shade canopy target post-development and post-establishment, we needed more space to put trees. And so that also then became a driver to do something with this. So the Sump was basically after detailed modelling to make sure that what we're doing wouldn't impact stormwater function, and with approval and partnership with the City of Fremantle as the council, the space was redesigned. It was re-excavated, half filled with drainage cell, just enough to be able to refill it, regrade it to a point where it no longer required fencing, and with appropriate entry and exit points and meeting all the necessary risk management considerations, it could be opened up as accessible green space. It's not public open space, it's not POS, it's still gazetted as stormwater reserve, but through clever design, it is still accessible. You can't put paths in these things, okay, because it's a stormwater reserve, but you can put a service vehicle track. And if you have the right safety ingress and egress, there's nothing to stop people on their stroll walking through it. It has been rehabilitated with predominantly local species, largely plants that you would normally find in what we call winter wet depressions in Perth. These are low-lying parts of the Swan Coastal Plain that are seasonally inundated. Guess what? We've created one. And so the types of plants we put in there, from flooded gums and chewits that can take, in fact, relish good wetting cycles over the winter months, but can also tolerate the drier conditions, and then get their roots deep down to pull that moisture up and transpire it and affect the local microclimate. And then on the flanks, we have all of those marginal species and dry stuff up the top, and now it's a very popular local park. We also needed to find a suitable source of water, and ideally a lower energy source of water than mains water, which in Perth is now running at around 4 kilowatt hours per kilolitre. It's the most energy intensive of any capital city water supply in Australia, made up of nearly 50% seawater desalination. And we need water to hydrate our landscapes and our gardens, particularly in a summer dry, hot climate like Perth. But how do we do that whilst also being mindful of water efficiency and energy use? So we looked at a range of alternate non-drinking water schemes, and the best one that stacked up was the idea of a community bore. I touched on the idea of a bore at my house where we draw water from the superficial aquifer, but how do we do that in a way where we understand the local site water balance, and we're ensuring through appropriate design, understanding the landscape water use requirements and good irrigation management, that we're actually recharging more than we're pulling out within that site. And importantly here, that we're not relying on the surrounding suburban catchment water going to that sump for part of that water supply. We only think within the footprint of the new development. And of course, with that urban development, with that infill, we're seeing higher than before water use going in locally. So that's the balance we work within. So we have this community bore scheme, which connects every lot in the precinct to this supply. The scheme is now managed by the City of Fremantle in a novel approach for Perth. There is a business case behind it where the city recover the operational costs of that through a special area rates, and the residents get that water at a slightly lower cost than they would have otherwise paid for scheme water. The scale of the site was too small for a larger true recycled water scheme to stack up in terms of business case, and the lot's too small for local grey water systems to be within Department of Health requirements for their dispersal. So this is the sweet spot scheme. So it's a scheme that connects all the lots together. And just to finish up, the ongoing data collection that we're seeing here is verifying the original design modelling. So overall, we've seen a 60% reduction in mains water use across the precinct. And you can see the impact of the non-drinking water schemes where we have rainwater harvesting at the detached and attached lot level, and with the apartments where we don't have rainwater use per se, but the scheme water savings there. We're also seeing the whole precinct operating at a net zero energy level. So as a whole, the precinct generates more energy than is used in operating the building. So again, operational energy rather than transport energy. And of course, the resultant greenhouse gas emission offsets from that. It's easier to generate power on detached lots with larger roofs than it is multi-residential where you've got a number of apartments stacked up and smaller roof spaces proportionately. But that's where when we take a precinct approach, we can do our energy balance and our water balance across the whole precinct. And whilst this project doesn't have a true microgrid per se, the energy balance consideration is still treated as one, and we can look at that as a very powerful planning tool. If you'd like to find out more about either of those projects, for my house, I have the URL up there. It's joshshouse.com.au. You can jump on that. All of our plans, fact sheets, videos, virtual tour, and live real-time data from the home is all accessible, open source. And then for those who want to find out more about WGV by Development WA, we have a knowledge sharing platform called Density by Design, and that's the URL there. This was supported by the CRC for Low Carbon Living. We actually case study several examples of leading medium to density development around Australia, but the major case study is WGV, where we have a video series that tracks every key step of the design, construction, and through to operation phase of that development. Also, all of our academic reports and other key case study publications are all accessible open source from that website. So please do make the most of it. Thank you.